Wore out. I don't know what to do. Feather falling off, they just wore out. So you're not walking away. That's nice. That's pretty expensive there. So Brown, yes, to try to put it on. Water down on the ground, get on the sand.
Well, good evening, everybody. Won't really do any formal announcements this evening. Just want to remind everybody, I think Patty is still home with COVID. So I know Ken was hoping to be able to see Patty because he went to school with her. And unfortunately, she'll see you, but you won't see her because I'm sure she's live streaming. So we're going to have Mark here in a second do opening prayer for us. And then Jeffrey will do the closing prayer for us. Here in a second, Ken will bring us a lesson on evangelism. But just to introduce Ken Craig real quick. So I met Ken, I guess, 10, 12 years ago? Probably about 10, 12 years ago, right, babe?
I've lost all sense of time.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking.
Well, I was asking you, and then you had no clue, so I went on to our memory for us. So we moved to Helena, Alabama, about, I'd say 10 or 12 years ago, as a family, and the Church of Christ was right up the street from us. So when we came by to visit, Ken and his wife Sharon took us out to lunch, and really was the first time that we were ever introduced to the big picture of the Bible, if you will, just in a conversation at lunch there. And then I think over the course of maybe 2 or 3 months of meeting and talking and just spending time with that congregation, Debbie and I decided to obey the gospel. And then soon after, Carly did, and then Madison and Ashley and our daughters did as well. So, it's an honor to have Ken here. This will be the third time, well, tomorrow will be the third time that I've heard the big picture presentation. So if you can make it back tomorrow, I'm confident you will enjoy it. But Ken is recently retired. He is, as I told him a couple months ago, the busiest retiree I've ever met, because I think he's been to 8 countries in the last 6 months probably, but traveling the world, working with the big picture, but also doing evangelism. So we're definitely honored to have Ken here. I'm sure he can tell you a lot about himself, but he refers to himself as an ordinary person now. I think that Ken is by far the least ordinary person I've ever met. So, we love you, Ken, and very honored that you're here with us. Hate that Sharon's not here. As much as we love you, we really wanted to see Sharon too. So make sure she knows that we miss seeing her. And then we'll go ahead and do the opening prayer. Turn it over to Ken. Mark.
Most gracious Heavenly Father, so very thankful for this beautiful day you've given us to come together and study from thy word. Pray that everything we've done tonight or do tonight will be in strict accordance with your word. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for all the blessings in life you so richly bless us with, our jobs, our families, our homes. Most of all, the gift of your Son who came to this earth, lived a perfect life, and died on the cross so that we may have forgiveness of our sins. Dear Father, so very thankful for all those who are present tonight and the encouragement that we get from one another. Especially thankful for our visitors tonight. Pray that you will be with them and take them to their homes safely tonight. Dear Father, very thankful for Brother Craig to come here and teach from your word. Pray that we will accept his word in our hearts and use in our everyday lives. Pray you'll be with our number who are not feeling well. Pray you'll be with Miss Patty, especially that she may recover from COVID quickly. Pray you'll be with all the others that are not feeling well, dear Father. Very thankful for the answered prayers on behalf of those who are our number have had surgery. Pray that you'll continue to be them so that they can fully recover. Dear Father, as we go out through the further exercises of tonight's service, pray that you will be with us and pray that everything that we do tonight will be pleasing to you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Well, I'm going to take this off. Well, I can't begin to tell you how excited I am to be here. First time I've been to this congregation, and I'm already extremely impressed because where I'm an elder at the Helena Church down near Birmingham, we just had a gospel meeting this week, finished on Wednesday. And my wife said something about how tired she was. She said, I can't believe you're going to go do these lectures. You know, I had no idea you guys just had a gospel meeting. This is like overload. You know, being an elder there, if I tried to do this to my congregation, they would vote me out. So I'm astounded that y'all are here, and I appreciate it. I know you'd like to have an evening of just relaxing. My wife was talking about how her mother would tell her when she was growing up, they would have gospel meetings that went for 2 weeks. You know, so it's all relative, isn't it? And but I really appreciate your time being here tonight. Seeing Aaron and his family, and hello Patty, if you're listening. I'm sorry I didn't get to see you. I was looking forward to that. Went to school with her. I'm sure she looks a whole lot older than I do, though. So, enjoyed talking to Aaron. I, heard he just had surgery. He said he didn't even know if he'd be here tonight, and here he is. I didn't even know there was anything wrong with him. And of course the Ackers, when they came to Helena, they just really embedded themselves with us. They are part of our family. No matter where they've been or where they go, they're part of the family. They came and they brought Madison, Maddie, and Ashley, and Carly, and we watched them do a lot of growing up through the teenage years and younger, and they're just family. That's all I can say. We love them. We stay in touch with them. And Gary comes down every now and then and runs races with the guys, and they have just been a tremendous influence for us. And I have to tell you this one story, because the first time I think you heard the big picture, he went with me to Tennessee. I drove up there and he went with me to do these lectures. And so we had a lot of FaceTime and talked about things, and I brought up somewhere in there talking about raising kids and teenagers and all, and I said, well, 1 Corinthians 15:33 is just one of the greatest passages you'll ever hear about that. Bad companions corrupt good morals. And I said, when you talk about raising kids, you can say a lot of things, but at the end of the day, that right there, that single fact, probably is the most important thing, because what are the companions that your kids have? What kind of friends do they have? What kind of music do they listen to? What kind of TV do they watch? All those things. If you let those into your life, that bad stuff will corrupt good morals. And I don't remember what else I said, but Gary was taken with that. The next time I saw him, he had a tattoo on his arm. And I don't know if you've seen this tattoo, and it says, bad companions corrupt good morals. There it is. See that? That's just what kind of a nut you've got here. I mean, who does that?
Careful what you say to me.
I know, but I want. Well, he said, he said that he might be considering becoming an elder here. So I have to tell you these things so you know here. But I'll tell you what it told me was, when do you see conviction like that? You don't see that very often, unless you're a Alabama fan. Because Alabama, Auburn, we'll do that, but to do that, that's the kind of person Gary is, and so we just love them to death, and we miss them terribly. They brought a lot, and I'm sure you understand that here. So thank you for being here. Love the actors. Why am I here? Several years ago, I went to the West Coast. I'm not a preacher. Let me just say that right up front. I'm an elder at the Helena Church. Usually when you have a meeting or something, you get a big name preacher in here, and all I am is just a big speaker. I was on a business trip out on the West Coast, Seattle, and the guy that was having the business meeting had a dinner that evening for the people that were there for the meeting. And afterwards, we were sitting around talking, and most people had left. And it ended up just being a friend of theirs who was an agnostic, and the couple that was hosting the meeting, who were evangelicals, and myself. And it turns out the agnostic was a close friend of theirs, and they'd been talking with him off and on forever about Christianity. So I got into the conversation, and it just went all over the place. And around midnight, I said, look, would y'all just let me take a few minutes and straighten all this up and just put this all together so you can see how this all fits together? And they said, well, yeah, we'd love to do that. Can we get our 16-year-old son up? I said, well, yeah, if he wants, 16-year-old. And so he was apparently a serious-minded fellow, so he got up. And so I just went through and kind of explained how the Bible all fit together, what it all meant and all. And when I finished, the agnostic guy, he said, that's really incredible. He said, I never understood that. And I was like, oh, good. I said, does it change anything about how you see Jesus Christ and who he was? And he thought for a minute, and he said, yes, I do. He said, and I'd like to be baptized and have my sins removed. I think my heart stopped, and before I could react, the 16-year-old, he said, I need to do that also. And then the evangelical couple said, we need to be baptized, have our sins removed. Well, I never had a reaction like that, ever. And so at 1 o'clock in the morning, they had a swimming pool in the backyard, kind of like the Philippian jailer. I think he had a swimming pool, and baptized all 4 of these people. And so on the flight home, I said, what did I say to these people? I didn't have any technique or special message or anything. And I realized as I thought about that, I had just sort of stumbled onto a very simple yet powerful way to share the gospel with somebody. And all of a sudden, I became an evangelism expert. People started asking me, well, Cohen, you actually spoke to somebody and they responded? We need to learn how to, come tell us what was your method? What was your technique? And I started getting invited to do these lectures. And so since that time, I stopped counting at 400. And I've traveled over 70 countries doing these lectures. And so what I have now is a lot of exposure to evangelism. And what I want to do tonight is just make some observations about evangelism. You can't help but, congregations bring you there looking for something. And so what I want to do tonight is sort of lay the groundwork for what we're going to do tomorrow, but put it in the context of what this is all about. What am I seeing out there? What do I observe, having been to this many congregations? It kind of reminds me of a story about a little town that sat on the edge of a lake, and somebody said one day, "Hey, there's fish in that lake. We ought to catch some of those." And they said, "That's a great idea, but we don't know how to fish." And so they started studying about fishing. They started buying books about it, and they brought in people to talk about fishing. And pretty soon they got to know a lot about fishing, and they learned so much about fishing that they were even starting to go around and talk about fishing. The only problem was nobody ever fished. And that kind of is what I'm seeing out there. Churches talk about evangelism. We talk a lot about it. We bring people in to talk about it, and we study it, and we do this. But by and large, my overarching observation is we're just not doing it. The members in the congregations, particularly, just aren't sharing the gospel with people. And I don't know, maybe this might be an exception, but I suspect that probably most of us aren't doing that. And that's what we hire a preacher for. That's his job. He's to do the evangelizing, and we got that taken care of, But Christ used this as an example of what he said. He said, "Come and follow me. I will make you fishers of men." This was an analogy Christ used in Matthew 4:19. He said, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." He commanded us to fish. And he told us what to fish with. Romans 1:16 tells us, "I am not ashamed of" what? What? This is a class. "The gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation." He said, this is what you need to fish with. And not only that, we see in passages like 1 Peter 3:15 that everybody should be able to fish. I don't care how long you've been a Christian. If you've been a Christian for 5 minutes or 5 years or 50 years, but in your hearts set apart Christ as Lord, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. So why aren't we fishing? What is it that we're so afraid of when it comes to evangelism? Now, I don't have any real new passages on evangelism, and most of the time when somebody preaches or talks about evangelism, they just sit and try to make you feel guilty, try to make you feel bad. They just come in and sort of beat a dead horse, and that's not what I want to do tonight. But I want us to just think through this a little bit and examine that, and hopefully set up the lectures for tomorrow that will give us some hope that we can get to that point. Most people want to know this. Okay, what's the first thing you say to somebody? It's like, tell me exactly what to say, and then I might learn this method or this technique. They're looking for some kind of a mechanistic approach. Just say these 10 things, and then people are just going to want to hop in the baptistry, But it's really not that way. And I think 1 Peter 3:15 gives us a framework for evangelism. Because when he says, first of all, number one, in your hearts set apart Christ as Lord. That's the starting point. Where our hearts are. Jesus said, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So whatever we treasure in our lives, that's where our hearts are. And what he's really describing is a term we know as passion. That's what creates passion. Whatever our heart is focused on, that's what we're passionate about. Somebody says, "Well, I just need to know the formula, you know. How do you talk to somebody? Well, my observation is we already know how to talk to strangers. I guarantee you, how many of you today talk to a stranger about something? Anybody? Every one of you probably at some point today, by phone or by interaction, talk to a stranger today about something. We know how to talk to strangers. It happens all the time. For instance, we might talk to somebody about the weather. We're passionate about the weather, aren't we? I mean, James Spann, do you get him up here? He'll break in right in the middle of Family Feud or something, and you know, with the weather, because that's something we're passionate about. Or if there's some tires are on sale, or our health. You know, I was just talking to this brother I'd never met before, and we're talking about our pains and our aches and our joints, right? Homeschooling, couponing, something we're passionate about. We'll talk to strangers about it. Any of you passionate about politics? You ever seen anybody passionate about politics? They'll talk to strangers about that, won't they? You know, we'll talk to strangers about things that we're passionate about. I see this all over the world. Football, Auburn, Alabama. You know, sometimes when I bring this up, I almost get people fussing to each other sometimes. And like I was telling, you know, this guy over here is wearing an Alabama shirt. If we're passionate about something, what do? We put it on our shirt. We wear a hat. We'll put a tattoo on our arm. If we're passionate, Gary wouldn't have done that if he wasn't passionate about that. He didn't just need a reminder. If we're passionate about something, we'll talk to people about it. And we'll put something on to let them know that. Hey, you want to talk to me about anything? Well, I'm an Auburn fan. I'm an Alabama fan. You ever seen this license plate? Let me tell you about my grandchildren. You sit next to somebody that's got grandchildren, and what are you going to see? Huh? On their phone. Oh, let me show you this. What? What are you going to see? Come on. Photos. You're going to be showing photos of your grandchildren. You should say, let me tell you about, let me show you photos of my grandchildren. If we're passionate about that, we want you to know we got grandkids, and they're just wonderful and beautiful, and they're the smartest and brightest and best in everything. And oh, by the way, here's my grandkids. Liam and Brent and then Landon and James and Coleman and Caroline. I have one girl. We're passionate about. We know how to talk to strangers. Is my point. We already know how to do this. We do it all the time. What we're lacking is passion. You know, and you know, Colossians 4 actually tells us, you know, it says, now conduct yourselves with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. You know, we don't need to be so passionate we just go and drag people down and hold them down and talk to them. We just need to talk to them like we would about anything that we're passionate about. Be smart, you know, and just find a way to bring it in. And, you know, if you're an Alabama fan here, maybe you see somebody with an Auburn hat and he wants to have a fight with somebody. He'll say, hey, let me tell you about last year's game, or, you know, how many national titles we've got and how many you don't have, you know. That's Phariseeism, by the way. But here's my point. If the fire is there, the methods will take care of themselves. I don't think we really need to have classes necessarily in methods of how to talk to people. I think most of us already know how to do that. We just don't have the fire to do it. And somebody else, another wise person, this guy named Emerson said, the man who grasps principles can successfully select his own methods. The man who tries methods, ignoring principles, is sure to have trouble. And every time I see us trying to come up with some method, some technique, it always gets us into trouble. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. So where is our passion? Why don't we have more passion for the gospel? Well, I want to suggest a few things that I've learned from talking with people, and you may have some other ideas. But the first thing I think is that sometimes I think we're just missing a sense of what God has done for us. If we don't understand God's justice and mercy, we'll never appreciate God's mercy if we've never understood His justice. And a lot of us, that described me as I grew up. I never understood all this. I just knew that when I got to a certain age, I came under a lot of pressure to get baptized. You need to be baptized, and when are you going to be baptized? And that's what it was all about. Now, I didn't have a clue about this. I didn't really understand what this was all about. And so that type of approach doesn't generate any passion, does it? But if Gary had saved my life, I would say if I fell through the ice and he rescued me, but we don't get much ice in Birmingham. But every time his name would come up, I'd say, hey, that Gary Acker, he saved my life. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for him. When we're embodied, when we're endued with a sense of God's mercy, that means a lot to us because we understood His justice that we were under. And so that's an important thing to realize. Maybe we're just not motivated. I said, what if we just said, look, we're going to give you $1,000 for every person you convert. Or let's do this. Let's make it $500 just for sharing the gospel with somebody, regardless of the result. Would that make a difference? I used this in Africa, and I was over there in Zimbabwe a few months ago, and I had 40 preachers. And I used this, I said, would that make a difference? And they all went, yeah. Because they're living in a country with a completely collapsed economy. If I have time, I'll show you my $100 trillion bill I've got from Zimbabwe. That's called inflation. That's what you get when you print money that has nothing behind it. Oh. But maybe we're just not motivated enough. Another thing, maybe we just don't have a love for the lost. Remember the story of Christ and the sheep that left the fold and was lost? And He went out and searched till He found that lost sheep. He found that one. And, we're the one. We're the one He rescued. We're the sheep that was lost that He brought back to the flock. So, we just don't have sometimes that sense of love for the lost. Paul even made this observation. He said, you were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you formerly walked according to the course of this world. There was a movie several years ago called The Sixth Sense. I don't know if any of you saw that or not. But it was this little boy, and he said, I see dead people. They're walking around like regular people. They don't know they're dead, and they need my help. And that's kind of the way I feel now. I fly through the Atlanta airport, the busiest airport in the world, and I'm sitting there sometimes, and I just see thousands of people just rushing, just going, focused, not talking, they're just getting to their plane. And I just sit there and I go, I see dead people walking. Oh, I wish I had some way that I could talk to all these people and share the gospel with them. Do you see dead people? Do you care? Do we care about others when they're dead in their trespasses and sins? perhaps, and this is the one I think, this is the one I see everywhere. We think we don't know enough. I don't know enough. We need to realize that the gospel is very empowering. Paul made this comment in 1 Corinthians 2 and verse 1 and 2. He said, "And when I came to you, brethren, I did not come with superiority of speech or of wisdom, proclaiming to you the testimony of God. I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified." Now, I read that passage for years, and I thought, oh, Paul's just using hyperbole here. But now I've come to realize he meant exactly what he said. This is where he started. When he went to somebody, he went to people, he explained to them the story about Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Because that's the gospel. That's what the gospel message is all about. But the approach we've taken for years is we've got to get somebody in, and we've got to get them into, when I was growing up, I walked around with my Bible like it was a hammer. And I was just looking for some kind of error I could slam with my Bible. And I had to learn all kinds of doctrine and arguments and stuff. And that's what it was to me. And most people can't do that, don't want to do that, and don't feel comfortable doing that. And by the way, nobody cares anymore, because now your truth is just your truth, and my truth is my truth, and it's all relative. There is no objective truth anymore. And so people don't want to do that. And so we just don't do it. We just stopped. We think we have to know all that stuff. And by the way, that's what the preacher's for. He's supposed to know all that stuff. Maybe, and particularly today, maybe we're afraid of rejection. We have entered a period now in our culture where Christianity and the Bible beliefs is openly ridiculed and openly taught against. And so now it's getting to the point where people make fun of you. I saw a quote the other day, last year, where a teacher in a school said this statement: "The only good Christian is a dead Christian." Now, who can believe that we're in a culture now that school teachers can make statements like this and get away with it? That's where it begins. And maybe we've just been seduced by the philosophy of this world. We may have lost our passion for the gospel because we've let social activism take its place. Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. All these different movements going on in our society today. The LGBTQ plus whatever thing, all this stuff now. We've let these things take our place, and these now give meanings to our lives. Gun control, all these things. That's taken the place, social activism. And, Colossians 2:8, "See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of this world, rather than on Christ." This postmodern culture, postmodernism has really been around since it really started after World War I. World War II, it started taking a greater effect. And really, it started as an anti-Bible message, because they didn't like the rules that said we have rules. So they said, we'll just say there are no rules. And it's created a completely unlivable and unworkable culture, as we're beginning to see, where men can participate in women's sports and just all kinds of nonsense like that. But in a way, that's kind of good, because we can point that out. So anyway, we have to be courageous, and that's part of it. Matthew 10:32 and 33, "Therefore everyone who confesses me before men, I will confess him before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will deny him before my Father who is in heaven." The second thing we see in 1 Peter 3:15, "But in your heart set apart Christ as Lord, always be prepared to give an answer." So we do have to make some preparation. I like to watch people that do rock climbing. Not for me. I don't particularly want to engage in a sport where you make one mistake ever and your life is over. But you don't just say, oh, you know, I'm going to be a rock climber, and just go off the next day and start up a mountain. But you have to spend years practicing. You have to study. You have to study materials, backgrounds, and all that. And that's what we have to do to prepare ourselves. We still need to know what the Bible says and what the message of the Bible is, and we need to develop the will to win. It's just like football. You know, every team out there wants to be national champions. But really, ultimately, it's going to be the team that has the will to win, the will to put in the hard work, the will to do these things, which is really the will to prepare to win. And one thing that we're lacking is we need to develop interest. I remember at Helena once, one of the teachers said, you know, trying to teach these 6-year-olds the books of the Old Testament, and that's just hard. They can't get these names. They're unusual. They're different. They got multi-syllables, you know, and crazy names, and they just can't get it. It's just too hard. And I'm thinking, yeah, I guess you're right. And then I noticed something called Pokemon. And here's just one chart. There's hundreds of these Japanese Pokemon characters, and they've all got Japanese names. And these kids would know every single one, frontwards and backwards. What was the difference? Well, this is something they were interested in. You know, they weren't interested in the books of the Old Testament, but they could learn it. They had to. But that's the way a lot of us adults are. I know guys that, you know, they get in these fantasy football thing. You know, they can tell you everything about every player, statistics, you know, but they couldn't tell you 4 scriptures that relate to the plan of redemption. But they can tell you everything there is about sports, frontwards and backwards. You know people like this. Baseball, same thing. Know every batting average, and innings pitched, and ERAs, and stuff like that. So we've got to examine ourselves and say, you know, why is it my interest here? Well, that's because we don't have passion for that. And so one thing we need to do is preparation can take many forms. And, you know, we need to study together and role play, and it'll build confidence among us. And that's one of the reasons we do things so that this won't go backwards, will it? Yeah, there it is. I got the wrong one here. Here we go. So that we build our confidence and we learn. That helps us build passion for what we're doing. The third thing is, in your heart set apart Christ as Lord, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that's in you. Why would anybody ask you? Some Irish preacher once said there's really 5 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and you. People are looking at you. Now, if you live just like everybody else lives, you dress the same way they dress, you wear the same clothes and the same makeup and the same everything, and you watch the same movies that they watch, and you listen to the same music they like, why would they ever ask you what's different? But if they see that you're living differently, they just might ask you. I was working in Brazil, and I had a guy down there who was an executive that worked with me, and he took me aside one day and he said, "Kent, let me ask you a question." I said, "What?" He said, "Why is it that you'll never lie?" He said, I notice you just don't lie about anything." That's because when you're an executive, it's just a lot easier to lie a lot of times, because people don't know you're lying. You can get away with it and smooth things over. I said, "Have you got an hour?" He said, "Yeah." So I said, "Let me tell you why." And I shared the gospel with him. When I finished, he said, "Well, that's very interesting. I never understood that." He was a scientist by training. So after that, I sent him a book called The Case for Christ. It's I don't know if you know the book or not, but it's a story of a reporter for the Chicago Tribune. His wife came in one day and said, "I've become a Christian." He thought, how do I talk her out of this nonsense? He said, well, I'm an investigative journalist. I'll use those skills to show her how wrong she is. So he systematically went through all the evidences of Christianity. And when he finished, he became a believer. So he wrote this book. It's a very good book for postmodern thinking. And so I sent him that book. He read the book, he called me and he said, Ken, if this is true, why isn't everybody a Christian? I said, that's a great question. And we started talking then. And pretty soon he's asking me questions I couldn't answer. I was just throwing books at him. Well, here, read this book. Here, read this book. After 2 years, he called me one day and he said, Ken, I want to be baptized. I said, great. Baptized him. Then he started going to colleges and doing lectures on evidences. One day he called me and said, Ken, I want to write a book on evidences. And I want you to write a chapter in that called The Plan of Redemption. He said, because that's what first got my attention, the gospel. So you can buy that book today on Amazon. There's a chapter in there written by me. It's called Prepared to Answer, by a guy named Rob van de Vega, Dutch guy. But it all started because he just said, why wouldn't I lie? Do you see how that works? I didn't have any special skill. I didn't have any talent. He just saw I wouldn't lie. He asked me about it. What did I do? I said, I don't know what to pick. Let me tell you why I don't lie. Shared the gospel with him. And that's where it started. Fourth point, in your heart set apart, Christ says, Lord, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the hope that you have. What is the hope that we have? What is it when we explain the hope that we have? What are we explaining? That's the gospel. If indeed you continue in the faith firmly established and steadfast and not moved away from the hope of the gospel that you have heard. The hope of the gospel. We keep coming back to this passage. You're going to get tired of it. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation. So what have I discovered? What do we in the churches today? How do we convert people? Well, basically, we have one method, one technique, and that is we want to get somebody into a Bible study. Would you like to have a Bible study? Would you like to have a Bible study? And most people would say, nope. Particularly in our culture today, a postmodern culture is like, why would I want to study the Bible? And who would be interested? Our approach is always, first of all, try to find somebody that's already a believer, that's already religious. And then we need to get them in a Bible study so we can try to straighten out their doctrinal beliefs and get them into the right church. That's what, generally speaking, our one approach is. And we want to get them into it generally takes about 3 months. We get them in there and we first want to talk about Bible authority. How do we determine Bible authority? And the work and worship of the church. And if they hang with us for 3 months, they'll hear the gospel somewhere in there, and maybe they'll be baptized. That's the one approach that I find universally being followed. But I want to show you something. We look in the New Testament. Maybe you've seen this chart before. This is examples. Pretend there's a pointer here. Okay, and so we looked on the day of Pentecost, the first gospel sermon, and the Samaritans, and the Ethiopian eunuch, and the Cornelius, and Lydia, and the jailer, and all these examples of conversion in the New Testament. And look at the variety of people that were covered there. Jews, non-Jews, proselytes, Gentiles, worshipers, pagans, non-believers, all those people. And we point out that, look, they heard the gospel, they believed. And what do we use this chart for? To show what? They were all what? Baptized. This chart's been around, I don't know for how long. Because we're trying to show, look, they were all baptized. I want you to notice something else. Every one of these took place in one session. Not a one of these took place as a result of a sit-down, multi-week, multi-month Bible study. Now, I know Paul occasionally would go to the temple and argue and debate with the Jews, but that's not quite the same thing as what I'm talking about. The gospel can be shared in one session. And I discovered that quite accidentally, but it can be. I'm not saying it has to be. You know, I'm not saying that if you want to have a 3-month Bible study and you can get somebody to do that, that's great. Go for it. You know, I'm not denigrating that. I'm just saying we have no examples of that I know of in the New Testament. And all the examples we have was one session. They heard one message in one session and they responded to it there. And I'm saying the gospel that can happen now. It can still happen today if we preach the gospel. There's this parable of the sower. You may have heard of that. Parable of the sower. The sower goes out to sow the seed. And what was the seed he was sowing? What was the seed? That's a question. Yeah, it was what? The word. It was the gospel. It was the word of God. He's sowing the gospel. And so the first time some fell beside the road, didn't produce any results. Some fell on the rocky ground. It didn't produce any results. Some fell among the thorns. So you had thorns eating it, choking it. You had birds eating it. You had some that was just beaten up by the sun. And in the fourth place, some fell into good soil. And it produced results. What can we learn from this? I said, maybe we should call this the parable of the stupid gardener. I bet some of you raised gardens. Is that the way you do it? Do you just get some seed and go out there and go, whee, whee? No, that's not what you do. We prepare the soil. We look for good soil to start with, and then we prepare it, and then we pop the seed in there. What was the sower? What do we learn from this? What was the objective of the sower? What was his job? What was he trying to accomplish? What was he doing with the seed? Huh? He wasn't planting it. He was just throwing it out there. He was sowing the seed. He wasn't preparing the ground. He was just sowing it out there. And that's what I think we need to understand. That's our objective. We're told to be sowers. Our job is to just sow the seed, throw it out there for people to hear. But that's not enough for us because we want results. We're looking for results. So what we do is we become soil inspectors. We go, well, I got this gospel message here. And that guy back there, sitting by Ashley, his hair is too long. So I'm not going to share it with him. He's not going to be interested in this. And that guy sitting in front of him, that Gary, he's got tattoos. He's not going to be interested in this. And so we make the judgment call as to whether that soil is good or not. Oh, it's not too rocky. It's not too thorny. It's just, okay. This person, they're religious. Hey, that's who I'm going after. We become soil inspectors. Now, who's responsible? We're responsible. What if we've misjudged that? But see, God says, no, look, you sow the seed. Let me worry about the hearts. God said, I can judge the hearts. You just sow it out there. It'll have the effect I want it to have. But once we've decided, okay, this soil looks good, what do we then become? We become soil preparers. We have to spend about 3 months now preparing that soil. You got to dig it and, get it all. And once we get it just right, then we'll pop the seed in there. That's what we do. What I want you to understand is this. Every time you sow the seed, every time you share the gospel with somebody, you are successful, regardless of the result. Because this is what God asked us to do. He said, look, be thankful for what you've got. Be passionate about what I've given you. And now I want you to go out there and tell everybody about it. And it'll have the effect I want. And you'll be doing what's pleasing to me. Every time we sow the seed, God is pleased. Regardless of the result. Regardless of what happens, God is pleased with us. We are successful every time we do this. So, we can look at a lot of different approaches today. What I see is that one approach is, well, I'm going to give my money to somebody else. You know, I'm not going to share the gospel with anybody, but I'll give my money to somebody that does. I'll give it contribution to the church, and then that supports Aaron so he can do the thing. Or I'll send it over to some country and support a preacher over there, and now I feel good. I'm not sharing the gospel myself, but I'm helping somebody that will. That's one approach that I see. Another is, well, let others do the teaching, you know. Let those evangelists do the teaching. I don't have the gift of teaching. So I'm just going to try to facilitate them. I'm going to, I call it the clergy laity approach. You know, they laid their hands on me, and now, but they're going to do the teaching. Another approach is this is one that if I was going to do one of these, if I wanted a method, this is probably it. It's like build a rapport with somebody. Take that 3-month period and use it to build a rapport. Well, if you got somebody coming for 3 months studying, you better be able to build a rapport. You know, and this approach says study the book of Luke. The book of Luke is fairly, or Ecclesiastes, I'm sorry. Study the book of Ecclesiastes because it's doctrinally neutral, so to speak. Got a lot of good common sense stuff in there. Once you get through that, well, they're with you now. They're thinking, you know how they're thinking, and now you study the book of Luke, and in that you teach the gospel to them. And another approach is, well, use your church as an evangelistic tool. Invite them to church. And I think this is probably the worst approach we can use. We turn our buildings and classes and we try to attract them with our building, with our singing, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And that's been a massive failure, particularly among the mega churches. This method is modeled after the marketing methods used by evangelicals. And it's just saying, these go up in smoke. They just don't work. And Gary Henry had some comments to say about this. I don't know.
The extent to which we've begun to participate in what has been called consumer Christianity.
Can y'all hear that?
Today, Christianity is just like everything else. It's become a consumer product. Jesus has become a brand. He is merchandised in the same way that other products are marketed. These are the days of individual choice and customization of products. You go into the marketplace, what are you looking for? From all the choices that are presented to you by the marketers, we select those consumer products that fit our lifestyle. That is, those that can become a comfortable part of the life that we want for ourselves right now. Trained by the church growth marketers, we present ourselves to visitors who come to our assembly as a group of people that they would fit in with from the get-go. Here's what we say, visitors. Come, be a part of our fellowship. You'll like us. We don't have any rough edges, and Christianity, as we practice it, doesn't have any of the stumbling blocks that it used to have. It can be an easy, convenient part of your lifestyle, just as it is an easy, convenient part of my lifestyle. Come be a part of this. That's evangelism in some people's book. And so our congregations become demographically so homogeneous, and our congregations are populated by birds that are so much of the same feather, they would enjoy flocking together whether they had the Lord in common or not. Converts in the New Testament weren't drawn by any of the benefits touted by church marketers now. They were drawn by the promise of eternal salvation in Jesus Christ, or not.
So it raises the question, are we painting the pig? You know, anytime we use something other than the gospel to try to attract people to our fellowship, that's what we're doing. We're painting the pig. You know, you look at all the different techniques and things that are thrown out there now, all the social gospel and all the things, food and bowling parties and, you know, all this stuff to try to attract people, to get them to come. And, but, you know, back here in the background, there's just the gospel, the simple gospel. And this is a great statement right here. What we attract people with is what they're converted to. So if you attract them with social stuff, you attract them with your singing, I mean, all these different things, that's what they're converted to. What do we attract people with? Our buildings, you know, our singing, our classes, our study materials, our friendliness, our worship services, our doctrinal correctness, our marketing, our money. I mean, these are all important things. And we should do the best we can on all these things. But not for the purpose of trying to convert others. We don't want it to be a stumbling block to them, but that's not what we need to try to convert them with. What do we attract them with? Romans 1:16, the gospel. He said the gospel is the power unto salvation. Not all these other things. These other things are important, but that's not what we need to try to use to attract people. So if you're looking for a magic bullet, that's it. The gospel. The power is in the message. Not in our skill or ability, not in our cleverness to sort out who I can share it with, not in our methods or our techniques, not in our attractiveness. The gospel is where the power is. So, the last thing he says in 1 Peter 3:15, but in your hearts set apart Christ as Lord, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and reverence. I can't remember the last time that I shared the gospel with anybody that I got into an argument. Not once. The gospel is such a straightforward, simple message that is blindingly true. And no one's ever really wanted to argue about that. Now that doesn't mean they accept it in every case. Some people are going to be rocky ground or thorny ground or beside the road. They're not going to accept it for a lot of reasons. But they're going to turn away from it knowing that it's true. They know that there's something to that. So if we're going to become an effective sower, there's three things that we need to take into account. First of all, we need passion. And let me just say this too before I get too far from it. He says, do this with gentleness and reverence. Gentleness towards who here? Who's the gentleness directed towards? Have I worn you down already?
Person being taught.
The person being taught. Who's the reverence to? To God, because this is His message. It's not mine. It's not my cleverness. It's not my ability. I need to share this with gentleness towards someone and with reverence towards God. That's what it takes. So these three things: we need passion, we need to have the right attitude, and we need to know the gospel. That right there, I can contend, is the three-legged stool of evangelism. If we don't have passion, then we're not going to sow the seed. We're just not going to do it. Doesn't matter what our attitude is or how much we know it. If we don't have passion, it won't happen. But what if we've got passion, but we're missing a good attitude? We don't have this attitude of gentleness and reverence. Then when we sow, we just might beat somebody up. We don't have the right attitude. We might not be gentle. We might come at them with a haughty spirit or something. And what if we don't know the gospel? But we've got passion and we've got a great attitude. I meet people like this all the time, but they don't know the gospel. So then we either burn out, or we teach a different gospel, or we focus on tactics and methods to try to get some results. But we need all three of these. And what I want to say is, everyone deserves the opportunity to hear this message, to either accept or reject the gospel. That's what we're here for. We're here as a congregation, not just to worship in this little place right here and come together and spur one another to love and good works and encourage one another, but we're who God is counting on to take this message out. You know, how did the church grow in the first century? The Jews went out from Jerusalem, they went everywhere sharing the gospel. It's through us. It's not going to be through what Aaron does. Oh, he's, and I'm sure he's doing a fine job, even though he's a physical wreck. I couldn't believe it. But we put too much on him. We're the ones that should be doing this. And I want to say this. You can do it. Every Christian should be able to share the gospel with anyone. This is my favorite photo of all my trips. I was in Tanzania, had never shared the gospel with a Muslim. And I was staying in a Muslim hotel. And I wanted to share the gospel with Muslims. So a lot of times on these trips, they don't like evangelists to come there from America. So the first thing I always do when I go somewhere I've never been is go somewhere and buy some souvenirs. First day out, and I put them around my room. Because a lot of times they'll have agents come in and examine your room to see if you're really, you might be a CIA spy or something. And if they see souvenirs in there, they go, oh, he's a tourist. So I went to a market right there on the ocean. Big market, outdoor market, people selling souvenirs and trinkets and stuff. And this guy said, what are you doing here? So I told him, I said, I'm here to do some Bible lecture, blah, 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 blah. You know, he said, oh, I'd like to hear that. I said, have you got 30, 40 minutes? He said, yeah. I said, well, come over here. We'll do it. He got 3 friends. They came over under a tree, and I had a translator who spoke Tanzanian. Actually, Swahili is the language there. And shared the gospel, and all 4 of them wanted to be baptized. Took them down the ocean, baptized them. They came back to the market. Guess what? They were excited. They started telling their friends. Pretty soon, this was like a riot. And people were coming up saying, I'd like to hear about this. I presented the gospel 7 times that day. This group here, this lady in the blue came up and said, I want to hear about this Bible. I said, okay. She had 2 friends. We went over and sat down, and that's me on the left, as you might can tell. And the guy over on the side, he's translating for me into Swahili. And when I finished, they all wanted to be baptized. We baptized them. And afterwards, she came up to me and she said, I would like to change my Muslim name to a Christian name. Now, I didn't even know she was a Muslim. You think, oh, well, if I was going to teach the gospel to a Muslim, I'd have to talk about Muhammad and the Quran and all this stuff. No, I just introduced her to Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God. And she responded. And so the first Muslim I helped to convert, I didn't even know was a Muslim. I'll tell you another story about that too later. But here's my point. First thing we need to do is get it. We need to get passion. If we don't have passion, it won't matter what we say here tonight or anything. But if we can get passion in our hearts, that'll generate some zeal. We need to know the gospel. And guess what we're going to do tomorrow morning? We're going to go through that. So if you're going to come, make sure you come for the first session. That's the most important session because it lays the foundation of the gospel message. know the gospel, and then practice sharing it with others. Then share it. Have a love for the lost. Become a sower. Teach the gospel message to others with gentleness and reverence. And then live it. Be an example. Let others see your service, joy, and passion for what God has done. I've got a friend. Let me just ask you a question. You go to, I don't know what, you got Walmart here, you got other grocery stores. You load up your basket of groceries, you're coming up to the checkout. What do? What are you looking for? What? The shortest line, right? Of course we are. Well, I've got a friend. You may know him. His name's David Tan. And when he's in the grocery store, he looks for the longest line. Why? Because he wants to try to strike up a conversation. He knows that person that he's going to have them captive for about 5 to 10 minutes maybe. And he wants to try to strike up a conversation with them. You know what he's got? Passion. Passion. And he's, he'll just think of something to try to start the conversation with them. And I've heard all kinds of things he uses, just, like you talk about the weather. What do you think the weather's going to be today? And once he said, he looked at the lady, he said, you look like a Christian. Are you a Christian? I mean, I don't know if I would use that line. But the point is these things right here is what we need to do. We can all do that. I know we can. I don't have to sit here and say, well, I know you can. And what I want here's what I want. Here's my objective for being here, is I want you to try to rediscover some passion. I want you to realize I can do this. This is not that hard. I can do it. And I want you to do it out of joy. I'm not here trying to whip you and make you feel guilty. I don't want you sharing the gospel out of guilt, because you're defeating the purpose of what should be a joyous thing and a great opportunity. And we have to learn that my objective to please God, to show God that I love Him, the best way I can show God that I love Him is not be at services every time. Now, granted, you being here on Friday night after a gospel meeting, I can say this: I think the Lord is pleased. I think this is a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. And whenever we do anything that God wants us to do, that's how He looks at it. This is how we tell Him that we love Him. But nothing will please Him more than if we start developing some passion and just sharing the gospel, regardless of the result. If we share the gospel with somebody and they say, well, that's not for me, I'm not interested. Okay. But is God pleased? Yes, He is. He's very pleased. You're successful. And so we've got to switch our thinking about that. And I want you to be able to do that out of joy and not guilt. So that's my lesson for tonight. I hope you'll come back tomorrow and we'll go through this to where I have no doubt in my mind that if you can sit through those 3 hours with me tomorrow, maybe miss a football game, I don't know, that you'll be able to do this. And you'll feel confident doing it. And you'll say, that's easy. I know I can do that. So I thank you for being here tonight. I love all of you, even though I don't know you. And God bless you all. And we'll now be dismissed with our closing prayer.
Yes, by our Father in heaven, the great I am, we come to you to close of this day, Father. We thank you for this brother and this lesson we've heard tonight. We pray, Father, as we reflect back and ponder on this lesson, that it will motivate us to do better. There's a lost and dying world out there. Father, I pray that you would help us in our transactions with mankind, that we can conduct ourselves as children of God. our life and our actions may be the only Bible somebody ever reads. Father, I pray that you'd be with us through the night. Give us a good night's rest. Pray that we can come back tomorrow. Father, I pray you'd forgive us for our sins. Guide, guard, and protect us. In Christ's name, amen.
Yeah.